Good evening. This is Alan Cohen. I'd like to welcome everyone to the June 22nd, 2020 joint meeting of the Library Commission and the Parks and Recreation Commission. And this is a teleconference meeting with commission members, city staff, members of the public participating remotely to ensure proper social distancing in this federal, state, and local emergency. I'd like to introduce the staff and commission members present. Commissioners, please present include, so let me start with let's start with the Parks and Recreation group. Is Jennifer Baskin, Vice Chair here? You could just say yes or raise your hand. Or not. Well, there you go. That would explain. How about Aurora Brosnan?
She's here.
She's
so it
here.
Looks like she might be frozen, but she's here.
Well, I'm sorry. It's quite a hot day to be frozen. Mark Bryman.
Hi.
We've been just chatting. Thank you, Mark. Mayrin Bunyagit. Did I hear a yes or a no?
Yes, she's here.
Perfect.
Yes.
That was perfect.
Oh, that was perfect. I'll do it again wrong next. Okay, then Peter Diepenbrock. Diepenbrock. I'm sorry.
That's right.
Here. And Peter Joshua.
He's here.
Okay, terrific. And okay, thank you. And then last, Kelsey Terrio.
Here.
Lovely, thank you. And then for the Library Commission, myself, I'm the chair, Alan Cohen. David Earhart, you're here.
Here.
And Katie, I'm not sure if Katie joined yet. Katie Hadrovic.
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry. I had connectivity problems, so I was a little late.
No problem at all. Thank you, Katie. And I believe Kristen Leap will not be joining this evening. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And Pavneet Singh, Vice Chair.
I don't think he's here yet. I think he's planning on joining later in the meeting.
Okay. And then Vamsi Velagupudi.
Yes, I'm here.
Terrific. Hey, good to see you. And Sarah Zaslow.
What?
She's not here.
Not here. Okay.
Thank you very much.
And then the staff present includes Sean, who we just heard from, and Nick, or Sean Reinhardt, I should say his whole name. And then Nick Shegdu. I pronounced that completely wrong. I
will answer to Nick, so that'll be fine.
Just Nick S. And then Acting Assistant Director of Library and Community Services, Rondell Howard.
Here.
Terrific. Thank you, Rondell. Nick is also the staff liaison for the Library Commission. Nick, will you please take a moment and provide instructions to the commission and members of the public in attendance on how the meeting will proceed?
So since this is a Zoom meeting, we're going to ask the commissioners to keep your camera on and your microphone off until you're recognized by the chair. And you can do that by either physically raising your hand or using the raise hand function on the Zoom screen. At various points throughout the meeting, for members of the public, the chair will call for public comment on items. If you want to make a public comment, please use that raise hand function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or if you're dialing in on a phone, I don't know what else you'd be dialing in on, but on a phone, you press *9 to use the raise hand function. Once you're recognized for public comment, we will unmute you. Please state your name clearly and the city where you live for the record. And everyone has 3 minutes per item to make a comment. Back to you, Chair Cohen.
Sure. And because this is a special meeting of the commissions, there's no general public comment for items not listed on the agenda this evening. The chair will call for comment on each item on the agenda individually. Let me see. Oh yeah, and there's a raise your hand feature. So if by now, if you're not facile at Zoom, you're lucky you. There's a little thing on the bottom. If you run your cursor over there, that's a raised hand. And apparently that's the preferred way to get our attention. So if you'd be kind enough, if you have something to say, If you could click on that, it'll show up next to your picture, and then we promise we'll get to it. We begin this evening with a presentation on the sustainability features of the Menlo Park Community Campus project currently under construction. Joining us tonight from the architectural firm of Hart Howerton are Jeff Till, John Swain, and Paul Mattingly. Jeff will be making the presentation, and then we'll hear public comment and have some time for commissioner questions and comments. Once the presentation is over, there'll be a call for public comment. Let me see. Go ahead. So I think
it's over to you, Jeff, if you're ready to go.
Sure.
You should have the ability to share your screen. If you can't, let me know.
Okay. I'm not a regular Zoom user, but I'll give it a shot. Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting us over to talk a little bit about the sustainability features of the Menlo Park Community Campus. Before I start the slides, I just want to remark on what a great project it's been, working both with the city, with Meta. We're very excited to be part of this process, and the sustainability aspects of the project are by far the sort of the most exciting things, particularly as they pertain to the people in Menlo Park and future users. We think that's shows a lot of leadership, and we're really, we take a lot of pride in being able to help make this happen. So let me see if I can do this thing here, share screen. How's that looking?
Looks good.
Okay, great. So, Hart Howerton are the architects, landscape architects, and interior architects for the project, but it's a much bigger team and a lot of folks involved, as everyone from the city is well aware. We've got a great set of consultants on the engineering side, folks who specialize in sustainability and providing solar power for the project, as well as things like civil engineers and so forth, as well as the expertise from the city of Menlo Park itself. So it's a pretty big team to make this all happen. Let's see here. You may be familiar with this image just as sort of an introductory thing. This is what it looks like to approach the new building from the parking area in towards the lobby. So it's a two-story structure. A lot of the features you'll hear me talk about aren't necessarily the architectural features of the building, which is sort of a whole separate attribute of the project, but just want to get people oriented as to what the place is going to look like if you haven't seen this image around already. So, we were really excited to hear about how hard Menlo Park is pushing on key sustainability issues. And I just wanted to put in this language, which is directly from the city's website around sustainability, and highlight those. There are 6 items on here, and we've highlighted 3 that are really important to this particular project: electrifying buildings, expanding electrical vehicle charging, and eliminating the use of fossil fuels from municipal city operations. That last one's a pretty big deal. And so Menlo Park is really out there in front and providing leadership on this issue. And this project is pretty unique in being able to do that. So the design of the project and the commitments that are made in that design are pretty important, and sort of the center of these key goals that were shaped at the outset of the project. So the project is an all-electric, zero combustion, and net zero energy project. So what does that mean? Unlike a typical building, there won't be, for example, gas-fired boilers or any other equipment which requires combustion of natural gas or any other fossil-based fuel. So it's a 100% electric building, which is not that unusual until you start to add in things like a commercial kitchen and so forth, which are part of the project. So that's pretty cool. Having a 100% electric building offers a big sustainability positive, in that any grid energy that comes into the building will come off of California's increasingly fossil fuel-free grid. So we're taking advantage of a continually improving and cleaner grid energy if we use any. And the net zero aspect of it is on an annual basis. So, you know, if there's some power being used that exceeds the amount of power coming in, we pull it off the grid, we push it back into the grid for an overall net zero at the end of the year. If you're familiar with LEED, that's a rating system for both new and existing buildings that's really around the entire world now. It's probably the preeminent rating system for the greenness of a new or existing project. The highest level in that system is LEED Platinum, and that's the level that this project is aiming for. We have help from an outfit called Stoke in San Francisco, who's helping us get through the certification process. The final Platinum certification for the project will happen after about a year after the project opens. It's a long and relatively bureaucratic process, and there's lots of checks and balances to make sure that we're really walking the walk to get that certification. On-site renewable energy generation, if you haven't heard already, this project is solar powered. And so there's a lot of on-site generation from solar photovoltaics, as well as solar thermal combined with that, those PV panels. The solar thermal provides domestic hot water heating or preheating, which is super helpful because we've got 2 swimming pools and they need that. And then we have naturally daylit spaces. Those are sustainability features that are really about the occupants, people coming to be in the community center, having that natural light and views out of the building. Number one, it cuts down on the use of artificial light and the power associated with that. But probably more importantly now, natural light is shown just to provide a healthier indoor environment and an increase in the health and well-being of the folks who are in the community center. And lastly, healthy and sustainable materials and finishes. We're only putting things in this building that are non-toxic and healthy for humans. That might sound like it doesn't everybody do that, but believe it or not, that's not the case in typical construction. So the specifications for all of the materials that people touch and are interacting with, ceilings, walls, floors, all of that in this building, go through a selection and filtration process within the specifications to make sure they're sustainable in their production and also healthy for people who occupy the building in the future. So that's a lot of talk over a few words, but those are sort of the highlighted goals here. And just to get you oriented here, here's the new building, Kelly Field off to the left there. You can see the swimming pools here and the parking area as you come in off of Terminal Avenue. Just to get you oriented. This diagram sort of highlights all of the features that are around sustainability for the project. So this graphic talks about the all-electric nature I mentioned, the quality of the air, the renewable energy we'll be creating, and how does that work? How do we reduce the demand for power, and this particularly for an all-electric building, in order to be able to replace that lower level of demand with 100% on-site renewable energy. One thing I want to mention real quick, there's also a resilience piece to this as well, which is the Red Cross emergency shelter criteria for this building. Not something you can see other than the building is designed well above the code for surviving an event like an earthquake, for example. This building is designed to withstand higher levels of stress from natural events, and it's it's the place where people can go to for shelter after an event. So that means that the actual steel frame of the building is built stronger than you would otherwise for just standard meeting code. I mentioned LEED earlier. This is what a LEED checklist looks like. We go through these main categories. You can see that there are 8 of them. It runs through everything from where is the building, and in the community, what type of water, how much water are we using, how are we reducing demand for water, all the way through to things like energy, transportation, and materials and resources, which I mentioned earlier. So this is how we keep track of our progress in the design phases and construction phases as well of a project to get to that LEED Platinum certification level. it is a whole sort of sub project on its own to keep track of that stuff and make sure everything that's going into that building is contributing towards the certification. I mentioned natural daylighting earlier. The dimensions of this building and the way it's laid out on the site are done with the idea of keeping natural daylight and the ability for that daylight to get into the interior spaces of the building in mind. So you can see in this diagram, there are spaces on the perimeter of the building that get a lot of natural light throughout the day. And in those spaces that are further from the windows, if you will, we've designed in what we call solitubes. That's a brand name for the product here in the upper left corner. Pretty cool. They are reflective tubes that allow you to have a skylight and then provide natural daylight at a remote location from that skylight. And they're connected by a reflective tube in between. So we're putting those upstairs in the flex classroom and also downstairs in the commercial kitchen so that people who are working in there have natural daylight for them to function in that space rather than just a bunch of LED lights that you might expect. So that's just driving sunlight deeper into the building, if you will. I mentioned sort of Menlo Park's leadership role around sustainable construction. The REACH codes we think are really important here. These are codes that are sort of above and beyond California State Building Code that Menlo Park is pushing for. And this is where the city is requiring electricity as the only fuel source for new buildings. And interestingly, for this building, it's pretty unique. That includes emergency power, and I'll get to that in a minute. But so typically we would have a diesel-powered emergency generator for a facility of this scale, and particularly to meet the needs of emergency situations, such as this Red Cross shelter criteria. And this building, we're doing that with electricity, with batteries. And this is just something about energy intensity. How do you keep track of all these energy-saving demand reduction strategies that you can then replace with renewable energy? We use something called EUI, which is energy use intensity. And that's just a unit of the amount of power per square foot or per unit area that we work towards bringing down so that it can be replaced by that. And you can see all the things here on the right-hand side that use energy, some of them very passive things you never think about, like the fan that provides ventilation or something like that that's running at 3 in the morning when the sun is not shining. So these are the types of technical issues we have to work through on a building like this to meet these criteria. The site has a liberal amount of photovoltaic power, and most of those PV panels are mounted on shade devices in the parking lot and by Kelly Field. Those are some pretty substantial arrays that the city will have in place. So carport arrays and the Kelly Field arrays. There are also solar panels on top of the new gym and the fitness area of the building. So Kelly Field, carport covers, which are solar, the roof of the gym and the roof of the fitness area directly adjacent to the gym, all of those contain a maximum amount of solar panels. Some of the panels that are in the parking area under the or over the solar carports also have a layer of solar thermal that I mentioned earlier that provide not electrical power, but actual hot water to help temper the swimming pool heating. And here you can see sort of a quick diagram. Above on the top there is what the solar carports look like. So the cars are shaded, which would be great on a week like this. And they contain a combination of solar photovoltaic panels and solar thermal panels. So heat from the sun and electricity from the sun. And there's quite a bit of it. The heat from the sun is used specifically to go to a heat exchanger and preheat the pool water. So the idea there being we can reduce the amount of actual electrically driven heating for the pool water by tempering it first with hot water that's been run through the thermal system. A little bit complicated, but it's a pretty cool setup. And if you like to swim laps, in January before the sun comes up, you're going to arrive and the water will be nice. And that heat will have been there and been produced during the night from these systems. That's actually the peak demand for electricity for the pool is that scenario. And in addition to that, if one of the other goals long-term was to provide and encourage the use of electrical vehicles in Menlo Park. So there are 27 electrical vehicle charging stations here linked into this solar power system I've been describing. Pretty cool stuff. So you can come here, plug in an electric vehicle, and you are driving on sunshine, which is pretty great. So obviously the sun doesn't shine all the time. If you can think about sort of the bell curve of daily energy demand and how we're supplying that using solar energy, at night, there's still quite a bit of demand at this facility. There is a very large pack of batteries in the building service yard to chop the top off of that nighttime curve, if you will. So daytime energy stored in a battery, coming back out at night for things like swimming pools, lighting, and emergency systems as needed. One of the, if you really want to geek out on solar powered buildings, we're using air source heat pumps here. This is something a little bit different. It transfers the heat into the swimming pool and also allows us to provide cooling for the building. This is kind of where the air conditioning world is headed. So Menlo Park and this building will be a little bit ahead of the curve using air source heat pumps. They're sort of a new technology, getting away from the old fan coil units we used in the past. And these use very little energy. So they're doing a lot of heat transfer, putting heat and cooling in the places where we want it, using the minimum amount of the electrical power coming off the system. I mentioned also that there's a commercial kitchen here and that it is also all electric. So we've been spending a lot of time learning how chefs use these type of kitchens for this type of use, for the type of folks who will be having a meal here at the community center. It's pretty exciting stuff. One of the things I've learned during this process is how excited people who cook are about induction cooking, which is what this range here on the right is. So all of these, in this drawing, this is a plan of the prep kitchen on the top here and the commercial kitchen below here, including the line area, the hot cooking area. All of that is, the cooktops and associated equipment are all 100% electric. From what I've heard, and I haven't really cooked up a meal using this yet, the accuracy of using induction cooking for commercial cooking purposes is way higher than propane or natural gas. So once folks get used to it, they find it's really an improvement. And then this is just to sort of close my remarks here. This is sort of the backyard, if you will, facing towards Kelly Field. You can see the mural area and the library above, overlooking the grove of existing redwood trees that are going to stay here on the project. So we're pretty excited to have a building that is as sophisticated as this and as forward-looking from a sustainability standpoint. I've touched on just a few of the highlights of the materials, the mechanical systems, and the power systems in the building. But you know, John and Paul and I can try to answer any questions you might have in more detail. I just wanted to sort of hit the high points. So just, yeah, any questions you might have for us.
Just a minor question. With the 27 EV charging parking spots, a lot of times those type of parking spots don't allow non-EVs to park in them. Is that the intention here? I only ask because parking is a pretty challenging thing in the Belhaven area. So is it going to be first come, first served to occupying the site or preferentially for EVs?
I can field
Good
that
question.
one. I can
Yeah.
field that one. That's a great question, Commissioner Earhart. As noted in one of the staff reports here for the study session tonight, the City Council has directed staff to develop a parking management plan for the site, and that's one of the considerations as far as which slots, if any, would be striped EV only or shared use, and some other considerations about like overnight use of the parking lot. And as soon as we have a date for that, but my understanding is that process will get started with the Complete Streets Commission this summer and then come to the city council like more toward the end of summer.
Thank you.
I also had a question. I have my hand up, but I don't know if everyone can see it. This is the first time really getting a comprehensive overview of the sustainability aspects, and I'm so impressed by it all. But I'm also wondering, is this very experimental? Is all of this that's we're going to have there with, you know, no diesel generators and everything working on solar and the pool being heated that way? Is this stuff that has been tried and proven effective in other places? And are we, I'm just worried that I'm not a skeptic, but I'm worried that we're going to have this really amazing modern all electric place. And the reality is it's going to fail a lot and our community isn't going to be able to use it the way it's supposed to. So these are probably basic questions you've answered many times, but I'd love to just hear that a component of it.
Yeah, I would say from a design point of view, this is not cutting edge technology, no. The systems that I described are pretty tried and true, but rarely have they been combined with such a large renewable energy array, which the city has committed to here. So it's pretty plain vanilla stuff. The difference and the specialness of it, from my point of view, is that there's such a large commitment to renewable energy in terms of the amount of overall area of solar panels here that allows us to actually well exceed the net zero threshold and then some. So no, it's pretty standard stuff generally. The electric building, I'll call it a movement, if you will, that's happening out there in the world, and to address, you know, sort of the climate change issues that we hear about, is really gaining steam, and I think it's gaining steam pretty quickly amongst public projects like this one, where people are able to sort of more quickly, you know, sort of put their values in their buildings, if you will.
I think I can contribute there, Jeff, a little bit too, in that in the event of an extreme emergency, perhaps the sun is not charging the arrays to the extent that is required. And in the event that the sustainability goals are essentially have to take a back seat to the crisis, we are employing a method of connecting emergency generators that are run on diesel power. So in that very rare, hopefully never time where the sun is not shining and you need to run the building, at least as an emergency shelter, there is a way to employ diesel generators to get, you know, in that time period where the sun's not shining.
I'll put a tiny bit of detail on that. Thank you, John. There's a specific plug-in location into the building's overall power system that's designed specifically to receive the output from a portable diesel generator on a trailer. And it's the controls are all set up to handle that input coming in if necessary.
So it sounds like Katie isn't the first person to ask that question. Yeah.
And I don't want to, I'm not at all cynical. I think this is super awesome, but I guess I was listening to you talking about it being innovative, and maybe we're innovative as a community that we're willing to commit this to our public works, and other communities will follow. But that part makes me a little nervous.
It does have sort of belt and suspenders, if you will.
So I think if he answered your question, I think Mark has his hand up. Go ahead, Mark.
Thanks, Alan. I know very little of this stuff, but I'm very, very impressed, and I like to think it's nice to know that we live in a community that cares so deeply about this. my basic understanding is that there is no such thing as being off the grid, that you're connected sort of regardless. Even if you're net zero, you're connected and maybe restoring some energy to that grid. With that said, I'm wondering, and maybe I missed this, but what is the capacity of hold on power in terms of the sort of the battery packs that were presented? In other words, yes, I understand in an extreme dire emergency, we may have to go to the diesel, but as a backup, I'm thinking it's that stored energy that we're going to first, correct?
Yes, the batteries will be in use on a regular basis on a daily cycle of energy demand and supply. They're pretty, I'll say, conservatively sized. The demands of this facility, because of its program of providing, the senior center and the library, the gym, a lot of things happen here during a very long period of the day, including January and December. So the supply side is formidable. And so the battery system and the amount of solar that's going into that system is also quite large.
And again, this doesn't mean much to me, but what is that capacity? What is that total battery capacity?
I don't know how the number off. That's a question I'd have to ask one of our engineers who's smarter than me on that type of stuff.
Yeah, again, I wouldn't even know the answer if you told me, but I'm intrigued. It's fun to learn about this stuff.
Yeah, another little thing that's sort of worth thinking about. This project has a really wide range of spaces in it for the people of Menlo Park, doing a lot of very disparate things. It's not like a plain office building or a condo complex. So, and they're all pretty power hungry. So, and there's not a lot of repetition between them. So we had to address each one to its fullest needs, pile that all up onto a demand profile, and then meet that with all of this renewable energy in the battery system.
Thanks.
So what I'm hearing, Jeff, is that the reality is that although that big battery array from Tesla looks like you should be able to run the country for a year, in fact, it's keeping on. So it's sized in a way that it's able to sort of serve the ebb and flow of what's needed, and can store some, but it's not the sort of thing that we could suck the electrical juice capacity off that thing for days or weeks. If for some reason we needed to do that, you'd obviously have to scale back what you're heating, what you're running, and even then, it sounds like you're going to need a backup system.
Yeah,
Did I
that's
hear you
true.
right?
I mean, if the grid is down,
Right.
but it's regular daytime activity with solar power, this facility will be the best place in town to be. There's been more power here than anywhere else. So that said, John, I think there was a number when in sort of emergency mode and the grid is down. I believe there's not much. It's a couple of days of battery, and then in comes the diesel at that point.
Yeah, I mean the battery pack, this Tesla battery pack, is limited in size. I mean, you can get much bigger batteries. In fact, you can line these things up and connect them in series. We've got one, and so I think we have essentially 24 hours of power for the facility for use as an emergency facility. And essentially, it's the keeping the kitchen running, the senior dining center, the gym, of course, as a dormitory, the showers. Essentially, it's that lower level of the building that would be running as an emergency shelter.
Okay. Yeah, I think that puts it into some perspective. I think that was very helpful. And this is incredibly important. I mean, case in point, as many of you, maybe all of you already know, Stanford, for example, had to shut down classes, had to shut down most activities on campus because their power source and access was limited. They're running their hospital as the priority right now, and the medical center, and everything else was shut down for the last 24 hours. So this is relevant to our area for a variety of reasons. So very good. Aurora, I saw your hand up. I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
Thanks. I wasn't sure if the little yellow hand
Yeah, I
was
could see
showing
the
up
little
against my
jaundiced hand there.
identical colored wall. Thank you, Jeff and John, for your presentation. I loved hearing about this. This is a passion of mine. I was just curious about, and this might be a question for staff, how you're measuring the net zero carbon coming from the building, and whether that is, feeding into a larger capture of this data on a city scale that's, lending to our 2030 target for net zero emissions.
I can try to answer, at least from an architectural standpoint, how we do that. There's been over the years sort of three big metrics for net zero-ness. This one will be, because we're going for a LEED certification on the project, we're looking at those criteria. But generally, there's lots of net zero projects that don't use such a heavy input of renewable energy as we are using here. But the definition for on-site renewables is sort of the toughest one. And we're able to do that. We're overshooting the mark. I don't remember, perhaps John, last time I checked, it was like 135% of annual. So we're not just creeping up to it, we're kind of going right past it. And the reason we're doing that is because the calculation is split between the building as a Red Cross emergency shelter and the swim center, which is considered separately. So that solar thermal that I mentioned earlier and the air source heat pumps, which heat the pool water, are not part of the facility's net zero calculation. However, we are providing a lot of power to that, to do that preheating I mentioned earlier, and then the air source heat pumps, which bring the pool up to its prescribed level. So in a way, this particular facility is, I guess you could say, overshooting the mark on the net zero thing, because we're providing energy on something that's not being considered in that calculation for warm swimming facilities.
Oh, interesting. So we're actually, so whatever the calculation is, we're actually exceeding it in order to compensate and cover for the pool of things you just spoke about.
Yeah, and it's really important. Out in the media, you often hear about net zero, this and that, to make the distinction between design performance and actual performance. So
yeah,
this building is a public building. It's your building. And it will have its performance, its actual performance, measured and visible to you and to the public. So there's no hiding on this one. There will be active, real-time display, including a monitor in the lobby of the building that shows what's happening. So it'll say, if you go in there on a summer day, that we're making 125% of our energy right now. And if you go in there at night, it might be 70 or something like that. I'm making those numbers up. But the idea is that this is also an educational opportunity for the park. And I don't know exactly how it's going to happen outboard of the facility itself, but I believe there will be the possibility of accessing the building's performance online as well, remotely, on the city's website or the actual facilities portion of your website. I don't know if those decisions have been made or not, but from our end, we're designing in the monitor that's going to exist when you come into the building, and you're welcome to the community center.
That's very, very cool. Aurora, did he answer your question?
Yeah, I think from the perspective of the building, yes. I had a broader question, but I think that's probably more for the city.
The net zero definition, I think you might have been asking about, is a pretty complicated thing. It gets into sort of zero carbon versus zero energy with grid tied energy and source energy. So I won't bore you all with the details, but people argue about this a lot.
Well,
I'll
it
just
looks
chime in though on that
fantastic.
citywide.
Really
Thank you.
impressive.
Yeah, on
Oh.
that citywide perspective, the city council has set a goal of going completely carbon neutral by 2030 in all city facilities. And I'm not aware of exactly how that information will be tracked and displayed to the public. I believe the intention is to do that similar to kind of the dashboard that Jeff described for this specific building. But that's a little bit of well, it's not that long range. It's already 2022 and the goal is 2030, which is very aggressive, but there are plans in motion to do that.
I should just one quick point there to Sean just reminded me of, and that is that, well, number one, our firm, Hart Howerton, is a signatory to the AIA 2030 commitment, so that all of our projects are also going to be net zero in the future. So that's one of the reasons we're so excited about this project. The calculations and the sort of way that gets displayed to the public, we haven't actually seen that yet. That's something that the city's involved with, not the design team. We're providing the ability to share that with the public physically in the building.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a very cool aspect. There's a lot of learning to be, there's a lot of sort of active science going on that should be a learning opportunity for not just school children, but I think pretty much all of us. That was great. Thank you. I think, Mayrin, I think you had a question.
Yeah, just curious. I know with all the new technology, you know, that they're meant to last for a long period of time. Wondering if what I guess I have solar panels in my home, and I know we have to once in a while have maintenance done. Just curious if that's been factored in, like with our budgets, and what that might look like. Thinking of, you know, as people are using the community center on a daily basis, and what it might look like with maintenance of the solar panels or all those other technologies, and with the ever-changing newness of those technologies, if we'll have to have updates of upgraded things. Just curious about that.
I can speak to that a little bit. Maybe Jeff can speak about just the equipment itself. But the city, for all of the facilities, maintain a couple of things: the capital improvement plan for any capital improvements or major renovation or maintenance of facilities. So some things like a major solar panel replacement that might be 10 or so years down the road, that would be factored into that plan. And then there's kind of the ongoing, what's kind of called minor repairs and maintenance operating budget, also managed by Public Works, and that's for, like, you know, the upkeep. So like if the solar panels need to be calibrated or cleaned or maintained, for example, like annually, then those costs are factored in to that budget. That's kind of separate and distinct from the project, because the project is really about constructing it, but we are factoring in that ongoing maintenance.
I don't know. Yeah, the only thing I could add to that would be that what I've been describing is all part of a holistic system that is the project's microgrid that is being designed separately from our design team. We're providing the building and the surrounding site and grounds for the system. The system is pretty sophisticated. A lot of the capital is tied up in the structures that hold the panels. The actual panels themselves, which do have a particular, a lifespan to them, are not the biggest part of the budget of the thing. I think as time marches on, if history is any indicator, the panels keep getting more productive per square foot and costing a little bit less. So, replacing them in the future may be a really good thing.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Unless there are any other questions from the commissioners, I believe now's the time to open this up for public comment. Nick, just wondering, do we have any public comment or any questions on this that we need to bring up now?
Thank you, Chair Cohen. If at this point any member of the public would like to make a comment on the presentation item C1, Menlo Park Community Campus Project Environmental Sustainability Features, please use that raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or if you're dialing in, press *9 now. And seeing none, back over to you.
Okay, so I believe we're now, thank you so much for that presentation. That was really, really cool. And having just shopped for a new stove and looked at convection stoves and plain old gas stoves, I'm impressed at the technology that we're going to be witnessing shortly in a government building. So that's just great.
And if I could add, I just want to also express my thanks and appreciation to Jeff and to John and to Paul and the Howerton team when the city council and the city staff came forward and said, hey, we really want to push all of these features because that's who we are as a community. They really rose to the occasion and kind of put together this sustainability strategy that you see here. And we are really impressed with it, and we're really, really proud of it, and we can't wait to see it up and running.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah,
Thanks very much, guys.
Absolutely. Give me a second. I think I just lost my page.
I'm going to sign off. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much.
Thanks so much.
Nick, I'm looking. Hold on. I was switching around between pages here. I'm sorry. Give me a moment. Here we are. Okay, good. So now we're at section C2, and this is regarding the preliminary results of the Menlo Park Resident Survey, Recreation and Community Programs. We'll now have a presentation on the preliminary results received so far from the Resident Survey on Recreation and Community Programs. Library and Community Services Director Sean Reinhardt will be making the presentation, and once it's over, we'll open it up for public comment. Sean, why don't you take it away?
Yes, thank you, Chair Cohen. So as the commissions are aware, City Council earlier this year directed staff to conduct an analysis of the city's aquatic program needs specifically and to survey Menlo Park residents on that. But then the Menlo Park Community Campus Subcommittee of the City Council expressed an interest in leveraging a survey to also gain insight into residents' needs and interests related to programming in the new MPCC project, which makes sense. So working with that subcommittee of the City Council, that's Mayor Nash and Councilmember Taylor, staff prepared a survey to gain insight in all these areas. That survey is now open to Menlo Park residents. You may have received some notifications about it already. It's out there in multiple formats, including electronic, and the link is right there in the slide. It's also available on paper, in person, and in English and Spanish. So it's still active and still live. So we're going to look at some preliminary results as of this evening, but the survey will continue to be open for a few more weeks. So the results could change, but there are enough initial responses just to form some preliminary impressions. Here's what the kind of web announcement looks like to get to the survey. So some preliminary impressions. Again, this is still open and active. This data could change, but as of today, there were 258 responses. So just getting started. 40% of those respondents report having lived in Menlo Park 20 or more years. So a good turnout from longtime residents. Folks self-reported their neighborhoods that they reside in. The neighborhoods with the most responses so far are Bellhaven, Central Menlo Park, and Sharon Heights, although so far every neighborhood is represented, and including some non-residents. The most frequently visited locations, these are people self-reporting how often do they visit various locations. Once a week or more. 61% visit parks and green spaces so far. 38% walking and hiking trails. 27% public libraries, also 27% for swimming pools. 26% visit the tennis and pickleball courts. 22% visit the athletic fields. And then the percentages kind of go down from there. The various other things that are in the survey. We will be looking at all these survey results next month, but this is kind of interesting to kind of see how they're shaping up so far. There were questions about how important various community programs and classes are. And so of the responses, folks who rated somewhat or very important, these are the things that are highest rated on those two metrics. 93% rated somewhat or very important programs and classes being focused on the needs of Menlo Park residents. 90% programs and classes that are free or have discounted fees for residents. 90% rated music and performing arts, somewhat or very important. 89% health and wellness, yoga and meditation. 88% fitness center, weights and cardio and so forth. 84% dance and movement. 81% strength and balance training for seniors. So you can kind of see that sort of health and wellness and fitness cluster kind of right there at the top, along with music and performing arts. There's too many to list here in this summary, but these are just kind of the top ones. So that doesn't mean by any means that any of the other stuff's not important. These are just the things that are kind of at the top so far. Aquatics, most important so far by the ratings, again, somewhat or very important. 96% said that swimming pools be open year round. 95% that the pools would be open 7 days per week. 95% think it's important that they're focused on the needs of Menlo Park residents. 90% that the pools have free or discounted fees for residents. 88% said it was important for beginners or children's swimming lessons to have priority to use the pool. 86% that children's and families have priority for using the pool for like play and social time. 83% somewhat or very important to have adaptive swimming for people with disabilities to have priority use of the pools, and so on from there. Again, these are just sort of the top more than 80% kind of rated ones in aquatics and swimming. Turning to athletic programs, so far as of today, 97%, very strong importance attributed to neighborhood and family access to athletic fields for casual and drop-in play. 97%, again, very strong to focus on the needs of Menlo Park residents. Again, this is athletic programs. 92% free or discounted fees to participate in athletic programs for residents. 95% children's access to athletic fields for casual or drop-in play. 86% for basketball casual and drop-in play. 86% for tennis casual and drop-in play. 83%, there was a tie between basketball, organized youth leagues specifically, as opposed to adult or drop-in play. And then gymnastics, youth, casual and fun, as opposed to, I think the other option was competitive. Again, plenty of other information still in the mix, but these are just like top ones so far. Here's just an intermediary slide to show what the actual online survey homepage looks like. When you land there, if you haven't taken it yet, I encourage you to go take it right after this meeting. Not during though, because in the middle of the presentation. Some additional preliminary impressions about library resources. So again, same metric, somewhat or very important. 98% said books in paper format. Books continue to be the brand. 98% think that Wi-Fi in the library is very or somewhat important. 97% that books that reflect the local or neighborhood residents' cultures, needs, and interests, important. 95% that books have a range of different viewpoints, including views I, the survey respondent, don't agree with. So 95% think that's important. Also, 95% that books are the newest and most popular bestsellers, and 95% that there be quiet places to read and study. And again, there are many more there. Actually, this one's continued because there were a lot kind of clustered above 80%. 94% said important for story times for young children. 94% have books in electronic or digital formats. That's like ebooks and e-audio books. 89% to have books that are classics that I read in school or as a child. 87% to have wireless internet hotspots for checkout and take home. This is like a little device that you just take with you and it's a hotspot. And 85% to have books written in languages other than English. So that's the library resources. Just a couple more slides here. On community resources and services, again, somewhat or very important, 91% said homework help for children and teens after school. 91% also said English as second language or ESL resources are somewhat or very important. 90% for teens to have space to socialize, read, and study after school and weekends. 88% to offer job skills, job readiness, and job seeker resources and training. 87% felt it was important for adult literacy tutoring. This is to help adults learn to read or improve their reading skills above kind of a basic proficiency level. 86% food distribution and food insecurity advice and support. And 86% felt it was somewhat or very important to offer healthcare navigation support. And there are many others on the list, but that's just a quick summary overview. So just where we are right now, again, there's still a few weeks to go, but some key insights that this survey is telling us so far, again, it could change, is that there's real focus on the needs of Menlo Park residents and especially neighborhood residents when it comes to these areas. There's an interest in exploring free or discounted programs for Menlo Park residents. It seems very important. To focus on casual and drop-in and family access to programs like recreation programs, like fields, like pools, to have multi-generational services. You know, a lot of focus on children, teens, and seniors throughout the survey. Certainly adaptive and all abilities access is rated very important throughout the survey. A lot of emphasis on the library side in particular on physical books, study spaces, tutoring, and literacy. And then among resources and services, a lot of focus on job seekers, job resources, health care, health and wellness, food security being kind of some of the chief ones. So that's a summary there. That's kind of where we are, a snapshot in time as of June 22nd. And I'll stop there and see if there are any questions.
That was great, Sean. Thank you. So Nick, I believe at this point, do we have any public comment or questions?
At this point, if anyone would like to, if any member of the public would like to make a comment on item C2, the presentation on the preliminary results of the Menlo Park Resident Survey on Recreation and Community Programs, please use that raise hand function on the Zoom screen now. And it looks like we have one, Brian Kissel. Brian, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and address the joint commissions.
Thank you. I really appreciate the survey going out to the residents. I'm just wondering, with only 258 responses in the past, how many responses have we had and how long are we going to keep the survey open to make sure we have a representative response? Could you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So the survey is open, I believe, into July. I'd have to take a look at the page to make sure, but I think it's open for a good time, 4 to 6 weeks, Sean, I believe is what it's open. And as far as how many we've gotten in the past, the last sort of big community services survey that we did, I believe, would be for the tennis users when we were asking about tennis and pickleball. And I think we received in the 400s, mid 400s on that one. Before that, the library did a survey asking about library services in the Bellhaven neighborhood and library services citywide. And I believe we got more than that, I think in the 600-700 range. Sean, please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the recollection that I got right off the top of my head, Mr. Kissel. If you want, I can go and actually dig up the actual numbers for you and shoot them to you in an email if you'd like.
No, just trying to get an idea on the ballpark. And the reason I'm asking is specifically around pickleball. I've had conversations with folks from Parks and Recreation about that. And I noticed that pickleball is called out in this current survey. I wasn't aware there was a survey done apparently some time ago about tennis and pickleball. When was that survey done and are those results available?
Let me jump in there and make a clarification. That previous survey that Assistant Director Jagda referred to was a tennis court usage survey in which it was really just asking folks, how often do they use the courts? What days of the week and times of day do they use the courts? And which courts do they use? And then just to offer commentary on any observations they may have. So that was really the sole purpose of that survey, was really just about how frequently the courts were in use. And that information was used to inform where starting a pickleball pilot program would have the least impact to existing usage at the courts, and that's what led to the program being initiated at Kelly Park, which of course later it was expanded to Liaison.
And how long ago was that survey done?
I believe that was in 2021, early 2021.
So is there an intent to do a similar thing if, I noticed in the survey, it doesn't ask those kinds of questions about pickleball and tennis now. It just says, how interested are you in tennis or pickleball? But in the conversations the pickleball community has had with Parks and Recreation, I think we've observed there's a groundswell of interest in pickleball court capacity that probably is greater than it may have been expressed in 2021. So if this survey does identify pickleball as an area of interest by the community, will there be a similar survey put out to figure out how we expand pickleball capacity?
Well, I think we'll want to complete this survey. Again, these results are preliminary. And so
Okay.
we'll take the results from this survey and kind of identify what next steps, from there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for your comment. Would any other member of the public like to make a comment? Please use that raise hand function. Last call. And seeing none, back to you, Chair Cohen.
Sure. Okay, well, thank you. So I believe we're on now study session D.
I believe Commissioner Bryman has a question, though.
Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies. Mark, please go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Commissioner Shank, when she was on the committee, the ability to get these surveys. Am I muted? Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
I think you froze for a second there, so maybe start from the top.
Well, I'm freezing. No. I guess all I'm wondering is this: how aware are residents that there is a survey? In other words, are we going to them, or are we expecting them to come to us to answer these questions? Is this survey being put out to the public somehow, or how are we? Again, I'm just following up on something Sarah brought up many times in past meetings. I'm curious to know how that's being promoted.
Hey, Commissioner Bryman, thank you for the question. And just to kind of elaborate on that, so we've been using a new platform, public input, that reaches out through emails or through the database that we have. So it targets all of the city. So that's kind of how this survey is getting pushed out. So it should be emailed out through that platform, as well as having paper on hand, having hard copies in each facility when visitors come through. So we've been pushing it out that way. And we're encouraging people to, by word of mouth as well, to make sure that others are using or getting to this survey, so we can get as much input as possible to kind of move forward with all the things that we're trying to do within the city. So that's kind of the basic. If Sean or Nick want to elaborate any more on it.
Yeah, we'd like to do some, they call them intercepts, where you actually have somebody with an iPad or a clipboard out at the facilities. So out at the pickleball courts, out at the tennis courts, out at the dog parks, with a QR code and maybe a paper copies of the survey as well. Some people want to take it on their own on their phone, and so they'll just take a picture of the QR code and have the link for later. We're planning on having staff out in the field doing that, and just having our frontline staff at the facility front desks aware of it and talking to people as they come in for basketball or as they come into the library, so that they know about it.
Makes sense. Thanks, guys.
So can I, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Katie. You're muted.
I said I have a couple questions about this issue. So if you were going to ask something first.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I was just going to ask Rondell a question since you brought it up. I didn't know the answer to it, and then I'm assuming it's straightforward, but it's worth asking. I think. Is it fair to assume that the platform that you mentioned is using a mailing list of people that live and reside in the city of Menlo Park? So, and how does that, do you have any idea like where that comes from? Is that like a voting registry? Is it a tax registry? So if you're renting or you own here, that it goes out to everybody. Because I just case in point, I'm pretty good at reading my 5 or 6 different emails accounts. And I don't know that I've ever seen the survey, but I don't know if my wife may have gotten it. And so it's just sort of an interesting question, because I think the point that was being made at the beginning was, of course, you only get reflection of the opinions of the people for whom answer the survey. and you want to make sure, I think all of us are in agreement, let's try to get a broad representation of people, particularly those, I think Nick was just pointing out, who are using the resources. So if you're interested in getting feedback about how the library is going, well, it seems obvious that when people come in and out of the library, advertise it there, but maybe some people can't come to the library and they're homebound. Let's make sure they're represented. So do you mind if, do you know offhand, Rondell, how, like, for example, do you even have any idea how many emails might have gone out, like what the denominator might have been? Because I think that gets to some of the question that was being asked earlier, which was, we've got 250 responses back, and a good survey is 400 to 600 in this community. Is that out of 12,000 emails that might have gone out?
So right now, that database gets compiled by the users, right, that we have in our systems. So our system, our eGov system. So if you've used our system, we've compiled everybody in there, which comes up to about, I want to say 20 to 30,000. Am I right, Sean? So it's been sent out, and we've all been a part of spam mail and not looking through it, right? So that can definitely be one. But on the other half, when you mentioned what about the ones that we need to engage that's not getting that, and I think Nick spoke on it as far as us being out in the field, having an intercept with the iPad, which is something new for us as well, right? And having staff in the trenches are having foot soldiers that's out there kind of speaking with the representatives of the community and getting their input. So I think that new approach, we should probably be getting more, because we're excited about that, to have staff be more present in the field, because it hasn't been done in the past, and that's something we want to practice going forward. So this is a new step towards that. So hopefully we'll get as many as possible, but it's a new start for us. So definitely want to have them out at Nelon. We definitely want to get some out at Willow Oaks, Kelly Field, Sharon Heights. So that's our plan, and we still have a couple more weeks to kind of get this rolling. So hopefully that answers everything.
Yeah, no, that was very, very helpful, and it's helpful to sort of get a sense of what kind of mailing list and what kind of baseline database we're working from. And I know when I've done medical education programs for physicians and healthcare professionals, if you get a survey back and it's usually under 10%, it's usually a single percentage range, like 3 to 5% is considered pretty good, which is kind of sad, but that's what's considered pretty good given the nature of the tool being used to get people's feedback and their interest in wanting to participate.
Yeah, could I weigh in on that? I know there's a couple other commissioners, but
Sure.
I think it's relevant to that exact point, which is, the survey is just one tool in the toolkit when trying to get a sense of, what are the community needs and what are the community desires. So the survey, a 3% response is actually pretty good and pretty indicative of sort of general trends, but it's not the only method of collecting feedback. A commission meeting like this is a very valuable method of collecting feedback. City council meetings are a valuable method of collecting feedback. We have a suggestion box, and folks leave more qualitative kind of feedback that way. There's the experiences of all of the staff and the users of the facility and those exchanges. And those various groups in town who also offer their input through focus groups and other means. In addition, we are part of and monitoring lots of social media channels, probably more than I would care to have to be part of and monitor, but we get a lot of feedback that way. So, the survey is just one tool. It's not like a ballot being cast or anything. Like the outcome of this is what we will do, but it's just part of the overall constellation of feedback.
Thank you. Point well taken. Katie, I think you had a question.
I did. Well, I have a couple things. One is while this was coming up, I went to my email to see where did I get it. And what I think is how I get it, is it in the weekly digest? That is a whole slew of things, and that is one of them. So it's not its own unique email coming to anyone in your database saying, this is because to be honest, the weekly digest, I don't think I didn't really focus on, oh, this is a very comprehensive survey for me to take. So that's my one shot at getting it through email. Is that true? Is that okay?
No, there will be multiple touches, including a direct email. And again, the survey just started and we're rolling it out over the next few weeks.
Got it. Okay, because I plugged in public input as my search engine to see where that comes up. Secondly, the other thing that I did while we were looking at it is I went to the city website, and it was very hard for me to use the city website to find this particular thing. In fact, I think I finally gave up trying to find it on the city website and decided to go see if it had been sent to me. Is this the type of thing that could be a little more prominent, like on the homepage and maybe on the homepage for the library too? And saying all that, I totally respect what you're saying, Sean, about this is just one of many ways you look at things. And I know also from listening to residents few years back now, related to the library, talk about survey fatigue. So I know people have survey fatigue. When I finally did find this, I was scrolling through it while we were talking, and I saw this is a very, 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 very lengthy survey. So people might even say, oh my gosh, I don't even care anymore. I mean, I'm being very cynical when I say that. Of course, I do care. I will finish it. I'll tell my friends about it. But looking at that, my only other comment is if you are talking about maybe ending the survey mid-July, I think as a parent of adults, admittedly, but thinking back to when I was the parent of younger people, summertime is like the worst time for me to pay attention to something like that and reply to it. And I think a lot of people are actually vacationing in a way that we haven't in the past couple months or couple years. And I wonder if you ever actually reach out to the schools for their back to school information being sent out to all families, because I think that if you wanted to capture input from families as they're turning their attention to activities during the school year, I think having that either be a link or actually a paper copy that goes home in backpacks, every single school in all 3 districts related to Menlo Park do back to school mailings and announcements. And to me, that makes a lot of sense to capture people that are of a bunch of different ages. So anyway, you may have plenty of responses that satisfy this component of your broad reach. And if so, then ignore all of my comments. But it wasn't easy for me to find that input, that public input on my own.
That's excellent feedback. Thank you.
Mayrin, I believe you're next.
Hi. Oh, so I was going to say, Katie, thank you for the idea. I'll reach out to Beechwood because we are year round, that they can include that link in our upcoming newsletter for the parent community to take. And I guess for me on the opposite end, wherever listserv I'm on, I felt like I was able to get that information in multiple avenues. So I did get email, the weekly digest, a specific email about it. And then I also got, I think I've been getting things in a text form as well. So just to give you another perspective, that I am able to get information from the city in multiple ways in a weekly, very weekly basis of information. So just as another perspective.
Very good. Thank you. Oh, Pavneet, please.
Thanks, Alan. Great to see everyone. Sorry I was a little late. I'm curious if Sean or Nick can comment on what is the transmission between survey results and then like budget decisions and actual kind of tactile actions on what's being asked?
That's a great question. So we sort of touched upon this in the previous report to the commissions about the milestones for the project, kind of the overall arc of when certain things would happen. To answer your question directly, all of this groundwork we're doing here now over the summer, we anticipate going to the city council this fall with a preliminary staffing and operations plan for the new facility. We anticipate, we will need to add staffing, add budget expenditures to operate the facility because there currently is no facility, and operating a whole new facility means you got to add capacity. And again, that would be in the fall. Now, the city council may not actually authorize those expenditures until the mid-year budget review, which takes place in February, but that would be plenty of time in advance of the facility actually opening in mid-2023. But again, that first look in the fall.
But so is it correct to understand that you use some of this survey data to substantiate the proposals you're making to the city council?
Certainly, I mean, it's a part of it. If we're hearing a lot of strong interest in, for example, job training programs, and that seems like something we really, really should do, something we are not currently doing, but that folks want from the new facility, then, part of the proposal would be, okay, here's how we plan to do it, and here's what it would cost.
Great.
Just as an example, yeah.
Okay, very good. Any other commissioner comments or questions? Okay, not seeing any. I realize it's getting late in the evening. If it's okay, I'll move on to section D, which is the study session of the agenda. And this relates to the Menlo Park Community Campus Operational Planning. And this is a staff report that I believe Sean's going to be updating us on. Sean?
Yes, thank you. And I'll try to move briskly through here just to get to additional discussion. Thank you all so much for all the excellent feedback so far. This presentation is more focused in on the programming elements, and it reiterates a little bit of the information that was in the staff report, so my apologies for that. Here's a view of what the site looked like when it was cleared last November. Here's what it looked like last month. So as you can see, the facility is being built very quickly. I'll take this opportunity to mention that there will be some construction tours, and commissioners are strongly encouraged and invited to attend the construction tours this summer. So when you see that email that says construction tours, open that up because that's going to have the dates in it. So this is what we're looking at now. It's coming together very quickly. Tonight, just want to touch on some things you've maybe already seen, but to have some discussion about guiding principles for services in the facility as set forth by city council, a little bit about the Menlo Park Community Campus Subcommittee of the council, and a working group of residents that they have assembled to kind of help them in their work. We already talked about the resident survey, so in fact, we won't touch on that more here. And then some discussion and feedback. The City Council has set forth in various documents guiding principles for the operations of facilities like this. In particular, the City of Menlo Park prioritizes social justice in decisions that affect residents' lives, the fair, just, and equitable management of all institutions serving the city either directly or by contract, the fair, just, and equitable distribution of public services and implementation of public policy, and the commitment to promote fairness, justice, and equity in the formation of public policy. This project really aligns with those principles and will be an expression of those principles if we fulfill the vision that the City Council and the community has for it. So just to set the stage there, I think we saw these in the previous presentation, but they're great pictures. So here we are looking at them again. So the subcommittee of the City Council, comprised of Mayor Nash and City Council Member Taylor, was created to work with city staff and the community to help advise this project and to help guide it. The subcommittee created a working group of Menlo Park residents to support their work. On May 24th, the subcommittee provided a report to the city council. It's attached to tonight's agenda packet for your reference. It mentions their recent activities, it summarizes some of their recent meetings, and it provides a list of the working group's ideas and suggestions for the new facility, for the new project, which we'll spend a minute on here. Here are the names of the participants in the working group. These are all residents of Menlo Park, Bayfront neighborhood residents, stakeholder constituency representatives. They're diverse in age and abilities and backgrounds. Some are from city commissions. A couple of you are actually sitting here tonight. And here's another great photo. Love looking at it. Well, it's a rendering, but soon we could take a photo of this very view next year. So some general feedback that the working group put together in that report, and here's where I'm repeating some things that are in the written report, to take a new, different, and fresh approach to services because we have a new, different, and fresh building. There's a desire to have a local hiring and procurement preference, meaning buying stuff preference, that prioritizes the Bayfront and city residents and any displaced residents and businesses. And this is coming from the working group now. A review the programming and operations budget, which is mentioned earlier, that's coming up in the fall for the city council to review. Starting with a review of current and prior community center activities, I think in particular with the former Onetta Harris Community Center, as well as in surrounding communities, and that is part of the process happening now. Outreach should include people who do not necessarily have a lot of access to technology or skills to use it, and certainly to Spanish speakers. And that recognition and awards should also include people in the community who created the vision and dialogue around this facility in the first place. Just thinking ahead to the type of recognitions and awards this facility might bring in. Some operational ideas that the working group had were for the front desk of the facility to provide city services, assistance, city information, community resources, almost like a mini civic center. I think that was the vision there. All staff to be, or to be staff who have medical training in things like CPR, or related to that would be automated external defibrillators, AEDs, and other techniques. To have attendance to make sure that the athletic facilities like the locker rooms, the gyms are kept clean and sanitary. To have clear rules and roles for public spaces about supervising children and safety and noise levels. Revisit the field usage policy, I think in particular as it pertains to Kelly Park, but fields throughout the city. Also to have another look at the fee structure and scholarships. I think this gets at that focus of finding ways to have free or discounted fees for Menlo Park residents and in particular neighborhood residents near this facility. And yeah, focusing on those needs of the residents and in particular the neighboring residents, as opposed to focusing on, say, renting out the facility to others for cost recovery. So that's some operational ideas the group had. Drilling into some of the programming ideas for the library and makerspace, some things like story time, tutoring time, librarian help hours, like helping people learn how to use the library and its systems. To have multi-generational, like adult-child book clubs, adult teen book clubs. I've seen where seniors read to children and vice versa. Those are all kind of great programs. For the teen space, one suggestion was to have music be a part of that, a place where the teens can play music together or listen to music together. And that the makerspace be well equipped with large tables, workstations with like 3D printers and pottery and a kiln, which the facility will have, sewing classes, including sewing machines, which it will have, a wood shop, maybe not like full on like drill presses and stuff like that, and table saws, but enough to do some woodworking. So these are some great ideas for how we might use that makerspace. Turning to the athletic facility, the working group had some great ideas about, focusing on like strength training opportunities for women, similarly strength and balance training for seniors. So just really making sure the fitness center and the fitness programs, are meet the needs of those user groups in particular. That the gymnastics classes or any gymnastics classes be sure to be accessible for kids who have special needs. That the fitness center be safe, state of the art as far as equipment and roomy. And I think folks will be very pleased with the fitness center. And I think Rondell is kind of leading the charge on putting that together. I think it's going to be great, actually. Teen fitness, inclusive of teens with disabilities. I think we're talking about like kind of a blended inclusion approach to some of the teen programs. And then the movement studio to be intentionally designed with functional exercise, like cardio. So those kind of real health and wellness and fitness kind of focus. So that's the athletic facility turned into the aquatics and pools, kind of on the same theme here, that focus on adaptive swimming for people with disabilities, ensure that seniors have pool, like water exercise classes available to them, and that there be lots of free swim time. This is kind of that unstructured kind of family neighborhood open swim time. In the more heated pool, this would be the smaller pool with the ramp, and I believe the ramp refers to, for access for people of all abilities rather than steps, for example, or ladder. All great suggestions, right in line with, I think, where the building is headed and will be. Here's a great picture of the pool. I don't think the previous people showed the one of the pool. So here's a new one. Here's a view of the pool. Some educational opportunities, and there's a couple pages of these, all really good stuff, that in this building to have educational opportunities for people to learn coding and engineering and science, have ongoing classes kind of in that STEAM bucket, health and nutrition classes for all, basic life skills, budgeting, money management, job seeking, basics like resume writing, interview skills, and dress for success, and social awareness. So really, those kind of supports. College programming, I believe this would be like college readiness kind of programming, helping young people or people of all ages, but I think in particular young people to make that transition into college, help them get there. Driving school, computer lab. Next page would be, environmental education and impact. We actually heard a little bit about this in the first presentation about the dashboard, kind of showing the performance of the facility itself, but I think also how people can use some of those things in their own homes and businesses. Bike repair, very important. Cooking classes, the building's going to have 2 kitchens, so it's almost like we have to do cooking classes with that much equipment. The teaching garden, adaptive recreation classes such as mixed media, art, karate, fun, fitness, cooking, and dance. So all excellent programming ideas, and very much in line with what is shown on the survey, and what we'll kind of see from the survey results as well next month. And so some next steps in the overall process here is the City Council is going to have a follow-up discussion about the project, including the resident survey results, more updates about the timing of the milestones, when some of these programming decisions will be firmed up, brought to council for resource allocation and things like that. And then of course updates related to the budget. And that's tentatively targeted for July 26th. Could slip to August 9th because I believe one of the council members might be out of town on the 26th, and I think we don't want them all there. But right now we're tentatively targeting July 26th. And this is a very sketchy view of the parking lot and the carports. Now, Hart Howerton had a much better picture, so I have to upgrade my picture here. This one's a little older. This is the parking lot, which I thought would be a good interstitial to get to discussion and feedback. Some key considerations are about those guiding principles we heard, the focus on the needs of Menlo Park residents, and some thoughts there, reactions or additions or questions about the working group's programming ideas for the library, makerspace, athletic facility, the educational opportunities, the pools. And then another focus area that seems to be really kind of coming out is free and discounted programs for Menlo Park residents. So those are some of the key considerations that the staff would be interested in hearing, but of course that's up to the commission where you want to take the discussion from here. And so about that, thank you. Back to you, Chair Cohen. You are muted, Alan.
Sorry about that. I believe the process is to open this up first, Nick, to public comment, and then I see that Mark has his hand raised. We can roll over to him next. But Nick, is there any public comment for this item that was just presented by Sean?
If any member of the public would like to make a comment on this item, please use that raise hand function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or if you're dialing in, press *9 now. Last call for public comment on the study session, the Menlo Park Community Campus Operational Planning. And seeing none, can bring it back up to you, Chair Cohen.
Sure. I think Mark had his hand raised. Did you want to make a question or a comment, Mark?
Yes, thank you. I think this question has a little bit less to do with actual programming than the use itself. And I seem to remember that there's been previous discussion about, yes, Menlo Park residents in general get the priority, but that beyond that, there were sort of local neighborhood residents that were feeling like they really should have more of a priority than just Menlo Park in general. Does anybody know what I'm talking about, or has there been any further discussion about the Belhaven community in particular getting sort of prioritized over the rest of us who are not living in Belhaven? I'm just wondering where that has gone.
Oh, I could take a first pass at that. So I do think that that sentiment in so many words is reflected in some of the material we've reviewed here, some of the discussions we've had, gosh, over the past couple of years around this project. I think it even predates this project with even the previous center and Kelly Park Field, where the perception, and I think based in some truth, was that the facilities were maybe balanced too heavily toward like renters, fee-paying participants who did not reside in the neighborhood, maybe didn't even reside in Menlo Park, and but by virtue of that, then there being less time and access for folks who like live within walking distance and like this is their neighborhood park. And in particular around the field, that had come up quite a bit, because the field, it is designed to be an athletic field. It's artificial turf. It's lit. I think it's the only lit athletic field in town. So a lot of outside groups using it outside the neighborhood, even outside the city, using it heavily. But for neighbors, that is their local park. I'm feeling like, we never can use our park here, whereas folks in other neighborhoods have a park that's right there in their walking distance, and it's not, kind of booked up in that way. And so I think that's where, this kind of desire and this visions kind of come from, just to make sure that, a brand new facility and all these new programs don't leave the neighbors behind.
Understood. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And you did address that a little bit with respect to not programming it so that we're gearing it all towards getting our money back from these various sort of third parties. Clearly, I think there's a distinction to be made between sort of call it, Little League groups from other communities and other Menlo Park residents, even though you may not live across the street. If you live, 3 blocks away, but you're a Menlo Park resident, I'm a little unclear about, I guess, that distinction. I certainly understand about programming, sort of for the paid user, as opposed to free time for people to, for locals, as it were, to use it. I appreciate you addressing that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mark.
Oh, go ahead, Rondell.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to kind of follow up with that too, in regards to the new facility, because we always get an impression of when something is being brand new in the state of the art, that certain people may feel, or certain communities may feel, that it's not for them, and that's the impression that we don't want to leave, like Sean was mentioning. And I go back because during this time I was in college, but when the Arriaga facility was being built. I'm not sure how that worked out, but I reckon, and I may be wrong, and I hope I am wrong, but I'm not sure how that engagement was with Belhaven and with the with both sides. So I think with this new building is showing how inclusive the city should always be going forward, because nobody should be left behind. And so we want to make sure that programming and inviting and hoping that everybody gets access to what this state-of-the-art building is going to be in the future. And so that's the most exciting part. So I don't want the perception. I think a lot of people get the perception of, oh, it's just for this side or it's just for that side. That's not what we want. We want to make sure that everybody's enjoying this new space. Everybody can still do what they've done in the past and enjoy it at once, because I think from what I've been hearing from patrons and users, that prices are going to skyrocket and we're not going to be able to use this. And, it's already that perception on the Kelly field, but I think with Sean, myself, and Nick being advocates of what we want and how far and what we want to sustain going forward, I think that's going to bring that anxiety or that level of unsureness down, so people can feel more comfortable attending the new building. And that's my hope. So that's what I'm fighting for in this whole scenario. Hopefully that answers something, I hope.
Thanks, Rondell.
Okay, Katie, please.
Yes, I was just curious, sort of following up on all of these points related to the working group that's working with the subcommittee. Is that a working group of exclusively Belhaven residents, or is that a cross section of all 5 districts and also maybe different community stakeholders or interested groups? So can you tell us if you know what the breakdown of that group is?
I couldn't give you like pinpoints on a map, but I think primarily just looking at this list of folks, and this is like just one group of folks, who are engaged in the process, kind of like the commissions are engaged in the process. But here's that list of names. I think many of these folks live, I think, in District 1 in Belhaven. Not all of them. I see a couple of folks who reside outside of the district, but it's primarily Belhaven folks. And I think that's really one of the main kind of focus areas of the MPCC subcommittee. It was sort of the council assigned that subcommittee to really make sure that the neighborhood was engaged in the process.
Okay, good question. Any other comments from commissioners? And if not, we're rounding the final home plate. I'm not a baseball player. Obviously, I'm not spending enough time on that artificial field I heard so much about tonight. If there are no other questions, I think we're on the last item, which has 2 items. It's the informational items, and these are transmitted to the library and the Parks and Recreation Commissions in staff's effort to provide an update on matters of importance to the commission. Informational items are not action items. However, a commissioner, city staff member, or a member of the public on this call may request or make a comment or ask a question to any of the informational items. I believe the first one is going to be the Library and Community Services Department proposed fiscal year 2022-2023 operational budget. And I believe, Sean, this is you again, if you wouldn't mind.
There is no presentation associated with this. It's really just transmitted for the commission's awareness, and happy to answer any questions that you might have about it.
I think the hour of the day is worn upon the team. I don't see any raised hands. So if none, Nick, shall I just proceed?
Sure, we can ask for if any member of the public would like to comment on that item. They could do so by using the raised hand function now. Seeing none.
Okay, so I think where are we up to F1, individual commissioner reports?
Yes, we are.
Yippee. Okay, We really are rounding the home plate here. Would any commissioner like to make a short report out on items of interest to the entire commission? Any takers? David, please.
I just wanted to sort of follow up on the conversation we had last month about the letters to the email messages to the Library Commission affiliates. And we did get those emails sent out. We did get sort of specific thank you responses from literacy partners and friends, and connected them with Alan in terms of going forward as the chair of the commission. So both responses back from those two partners were very positive, and it seemed like there was an interest expressed in taking advantage of the platform of coming before the commission and then getting public exposure to some of their library adjacent activities. So thank you for your support in reviewing that last month, and look forward to engaging with them as we go forward.
Terrific. Thank you, David. A flurry of hands. Katie, please.
I just wanted to comment on that comment of David's, to say that there's actually a library foundation meeting tomorrow, which I'll be at. And so I will ask if anybody has an interest in that, and have them follow up with Alan, or I'll follow up.
Thank you so much, Katie. And Aurora, I believe you had a hand raised as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Cohen. I don't have anything to report. I just wanted to say hello and welcome to the Library Commission, because this is the first joint meeting I've attended with you. And because I was absent last month, I just wanted to say hello and welcome to the new Parks and Recreations Commissioners, Thoreau and
Bunyagit.
Bunyagit. Yes, thank you so much. Welcome to the commission.
Terrific. Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, Nick, want to take it home?
Well, seeing no other comments, you can adjourn the meeting.
Okay, so I'd like to adjourn the meeting, and I believe the time is 8:18 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Wednesday, June 22nd. Thank you so much.
Thank
It
you,
was lovely
everybody.
seeing everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good night.
Appreciate you
Bye.
spending
Have a great
time.
night. Thanks again.
Have a great night.